Has really been devoted to a place to say, at least amongst ourselves, let's get together and inspire each other. So I've had discussion groups here for 39 years, looking at Eastern and Western traditions. I've gathered all these books, but more importantly, underneath is this story of home, that sense of the question of how do we gather to remind ourselves that the world exhausts all of us with critique. So when we get together, how do we restore one another? And that's why a lot of this with the equinox is very lovely that this is intimate, because so much of this now is, I do feel, about finding a sense of intimacy with one's own story, a sense of relevance, a sense of why these things matter, and that we're being challenged by such enormous forces. You know, and that's why I wanted to talk tonight a bit about archetype as well. And so when Whitley gets here, we'll just dive in. But I'm gonna break this into really three parts, and I wanted to just use the upstairs as a type of mythic instrument or as a type of theater piece, because once we create permission for the imagination, then we start to allow things to happen because we've created, as I say, a sense of agreement. Not something that was controllable, it wasn't even comprehensible, it was overwhelming. And we stayed. I'm an old Malibu boy, and you don't leave. You don't leave. And I feel also a bit like Noah and the ark, and if Noah had been told it was raining, I don't think he would have left the ark. And I feel that it was the fire that really became the initiation of our home, Olandar. And as you were saying, we felt so palpably a prayer field. And I've always been poetic and an actor, and I've always appreciated these energies, but to feel them directly as a field of energy, as a great protective force, was new. And that what we experienced took us really out of our normal human behavior and threw us into a very alchemical and remarkable period of 20 days, where all of our resources, all of the ways we expected things to be, no longer were. And everything we thought would be backing us up when the fires were here weren't. The fires came through, actually a tornado came through here. And as the tornado came through, luckily, and this is the strength of the garden, I want to talk about this tonight as well, is that I had started the sprinklers on my roof going. I had found, really, I knew in Malibu that your water will go. So use it as much as you can. Get things as wet as you can. And when the tornado hit, it moved so quickly that it actually bounced and moved up. Now, why this is important is that we can say that's just a fluke. But we're also going to understand that it's sentient. This is what many of the people who really deal with fire, you're not dealing with something that is just force. You're dealing with something that has some type of sentience, some type of relationship with who and what we are. And that's why the story tonight is looking at the question that came to me during the fires, which were, it's so funny, usually this phone never rings. Yes, exactly. So, I guess one of the archetypes is calling. They're phoning it in, and we're, be careful of what you say tonight. The what? Yeah, it's on. Yeah. So, tonight, because of the fires and trying to again understand the nature of a mass event. A mass event is not. It's something we experience personally, but it affects everyone. And therefore, when you survive a mass event, as we did, you're astoundingly humble. You're incredibly grateful, because you realize how impossible it is, how miraculous it is when these energies are about to actually survive the night. But there's no fighting it, there's working with it. And so my garden told me on the night of the fire, that everything in the garden is alive. Everything in the garden wants to live. You are the part of the garden that is in motion. We have your back. And my trees told me we are not fuel, we are guardians. And this is very important because here we are in Chumash land. And this is really the knowledge of our sacred ancestral connection, like trees, to the land itself. And part of the story of the fire reaching Malibu, reaching the coast, was that it happened 2 years from the election. So it happened on not 9/11, but 11/9. And when we don't look at this politically, but we look at it really mythically, we begin to understand that the fire is about anger. It's about ire. It's about knowing what we hate and forgetting what we love. Accusing the neighbor more of what is wrong with them than looking at those we love and telling them what's right about them. And that's why everything in my home, it's very important, because the art here is not an illustration of anything. I'm not a metaphysician in the old sense of the word. All of my work comes from the asking questions about the nature of consciousness. Who are we then? And that's why it's very important tonight on the equinox to use this place and these stories as a sense of mythic permission. Joseph Campbell was very helpful. He really taught us to say, look, if you understand myth, there's no tragedy in myth. Because myth helps you understand that the structure over and over again is black and white. And that's why the tarot archetypes surround us. All of my work that took me 17 years to create 22 lenses of the theater of the psyche, really the characters of the Shakespearean play. Why are we wired the way we are? So tonight, as we sit with the archetypes, we're really sitting like the piano. We're sitting with the structure of the psyche. And the characters in the play, like the keys on the piano, say, if you oppose us, you never create music. It's not one character against another. When you understand the play, every character is essential to the question. And so the question now for us is, what happens when we reach the end of our journey, when there's no further to go in a sense of direction, and when the fires have devastated everyone? And we're asked one thing. You're rebuilding. You're regrowing, because from judgment, annihilation, comes rebirth, the phoenix, the ashes. It says, so what are you rebuilding with? What are your values? What do you honor? And that's why I think it's very important that this is my home. I think a lot is said when we understand I honor the values of where I live, because that's a different level of responsibility than those I'm trying to convince. And it's very important tonight because this is also when we begin to move, because people often ask, they say, well, what's the point of myth? What's the point of these things? How do you integrate them? And the point is that our arts, our sense of community, our storytelling is where we integrate them. Not because we create a new religion, nobody needs that. But we actually welcome them into a context that say, you know what, you're more interesting than you think. And if you include us, you'll find that you have a far greater story than you think you do. And that's another thing tonight, is I want us to understand that much of this tonight is about a return to the library. This great question of why did we leave? Why did we go away? And why has it been so hard to return? And now when we look around the world, we see so much anguish. Why? What happened in Mozambique yesterday? All over the world, you're seeing absolute devastation. And that doesn't affect just the people who believe one way or another. It affects everyone. And when we drive around this area, you feel the trauma. You don't get out of it. It's scarred the zeitgeist of the land. But in that collapse, and this is very important because a lot of this, the upstairs began on 9/11/2001 with the first collapse. And that was the collapse of the binary of money and God. I have more than you do. Do you see collapsing? And bringing us to our knees, knocking us off the scaffolding. Get off the Sistine Chapel. Quit talking to gods and popes. Talk to your wife and your children. This is very important because this is about having ascended, creating an ego, and then rediscovering a sense of humility. But not a humility that is false, rather a humility that is generational. Meaning that when we look with an open heart, we realize that the struggle is in every book in the library. And we're woven of all of those stories. So tonight when we talk about upstairs, a little bit of letting go, I really want us to think about letting go, putting back into the books the stories that really aren't ours. But again, here we have adopted a lot of them. Because really the archetypes I want to talk about before we ascend are the ones that came to me during the nights of the fire. And that's why one of the great things about the symbolism here, and I'm not going to go into the symbolism of the drawings as much because my book, Tarot Revision, does that quite wonderfully and very inspiringly. And this is why I want to bring them more out as actors of the psyche now, meaning that they're characters within us that if we begin to understand their language. And part of the key is that with the tarot, if you look at each of the archetypes and you were to stand behind them, and your acting challenge was, I want you to tell the truth of the world from the Empress's point of view. I want you to tell the truth of the world from the Devil's point of view. I want you to tell the true point of view from Justice's point of view. You see, we would be telling the truth in each of those perspectives. This helps us understand really the critical mass of where we've gotten to. We've gotten here by having our backs to each other. Who am I? And that separated us. But at the end of the day, it's how do we come back together, not to tell a story of I am more than you, but I am actually full of the same story of trying to translate despair into meaning. Trying to understand when you look at the world that is constantly in angst. It's not about the angst. It's about what do you do with that. And then you become very proud of our species because there's always a response. This will not pass. Like you said, I felt this with the fire here. I literally felt people saying, this will not leave. We will not allow it. And it felt like angels on my back. I felt like an old knight. I really did. I didn't know whether I'd survive, whether we'd survive the night at all. But I had confidence that it wasn't about that. It was about doing exactly what I could do to the greatest degree that I could do it. That was my responsibility. And I feel that these are the keys that are coming now, because when we understand our mythic responsibility, like characters in a play, it's not you need to do this and you need to be different, but rather each of us are going to understand as we move into these times and into this night of creating and letting go of the Emperor. Now he is really the sun in Aries, this alchemical key of initiation, of setting things in motion. And this is very important because the equinox, if you think about it, the wheel is stationary. But we put the seed on the moment of the equinox and we push the wheel. And then we go into the next day, the next day, the next day, the season. Because that seed is going to grow as the wheel turns. And that's what's beautiful here with Libra and the full moon tonight. Because it's a very magical time. Libra is about balance and beauty. Essentially, you would say Libra is the blossoming of the flower after such difficulty of the bud. So that's this inner tension going on in all of us, which is, if this is happening, where do I allow this to happen? And that's why, again, this is intimate space. It says where you feel safe, where you don't feel judged, and where you experience things that if you feel judged, you keep them private until you're with those that don't judge you. We become wise gardeners again, rather than foolish critics. And that's why, let's move in quickly to what I'm really calling the archetypal actors in the play of being human, expressed in the symbolical language of tarot. And the four archetypes we're going to look at are the natural and unnatural forces that are incomprehensible and uncontrollable, of which the world and ourselves are woven. This is one of the things that we have a very tepid sense of who we are. We do not realize that we are woven of fury. And this comes out in our sense of trying to numb ourselves because the energies inside of us are so very great. And on the night of the fifth night of the fires, and this is why I have to talk about it tonight. It was on the fifth night of the fires, and the people that were here will remember that the fires kept coming back. The winds whipped up, they were dry, and as they leaned into the night with the fire extinguisher, and we charged up toward where it was starting to burn again, the energy wrapped around me, almost like something out of a horror film, and hissed, "Tell me what you hate and I'll burn down your house." And it was a chill that went right up my spine. It was probing me. It was saying, tell me what you blame. Whose fault is this? Let me find why you hate. And I'll find your heart. I'll find what's burning in your heart. And one way or another, I'll destroy what you are. And it was this very strong and powerful, shocking moment. But I also realized it's like standing in front of a tsunami. A tsunami is not really interested in how you're feeling. And we're so used to thinking we can control these energies. And what's afoot now is actually pushing us into archetypal seas. One of the great things to think about tonight is this is the human imagination finding its way as community, as storytellers, to an understanding that we're the technology. That there is nothing to fear when a bud becomes a blossom. It doesn't destroy the infrastructure, it shifts how it uses its energies. And the four archetypes of the apocalypse, the four horsemen as they're known in Revelations, not to be biblical, but it's biblical, meaning that it's the energies that are structural, that don't have to do with how we're feeling, but when we begin to live on land and believe that we can own the land rather than be wise custodians of it, then we start to tick things off. And sooner or later, living out of sympathy with nature, which is quite normal for us, but we learn these lessons because they begin to say you have to differentiate between what you are in terms of your capacity to navigate this story and not blame your neighbor. And that's why as we moved in, the four horsemen turned out to be this relationship to death, which is key 13. Now, death is also rebirth, so we don't get all negative about it, but death is also the vitality of life. It strips away because it is making the unconscious conscious. Has to do with Scorpio. Has to do with fear. And that fear is a great teacher because what we fear teaches us ultimately not to fear. It's like the water when it's very great for a sailor. You're afraid of it, but then it teaches you how to navigate it. You're still afraid of it, meaning you respect it, but you still sail. And that's what these energies want. A lot of us live in the bay of our consciousness, and we want to be very comfortable. And that's why a lot of these energies are stripping people's comfort. We can't build a wall. That's what Malibu taught. You cannot build a wall and have a high gate and think the fire is going to stop because it's impressed. It comes over the wall. And that's what's coming over the wall. So with death, there's the story then behind this of, we'll see, temperance. Now, death has to do with fear, and temperance really to do with wrath. Now, wrath, if you think about this as fire, alchemically, this is what tempers hot steel. You see? It makes it flexible. We don't like to think of ourselves this way because we like to think of ourselves as something static rather than that the fires of life are tempering us. This is why temperance was not about moderation. It was about the dark night of the soul. When everything is stripped away, who are you then? Where do you build yourself from? And so temperance is this story really of the heating up of this inner alchemy until finally there is the revelation where we live in love, that I am the story from which I must begin what it means to be human. And if I do, I begin with my sense of domestic responsibility to those I love. And if we carry that into the library of the human story, the Akashic, we begin to understand this is what gives us ingress. We have ingress to what we honor. What we critique is not interested in us in the least. And this is why the Tower. Now, part of the fire going on, part of the anger in the world is if we think symbolically, 9/11 was 2 years from the election. The Trump Tower is the 16th key of the tarot. The Tower Trump is Mars. Mars is fire. Mars sets everything ablaze because it is the falling away of the tower of the old assumptions that kept us comfortable, that burn away what we thought we once were. But the great thing is, because this really has to do with the power, the absolute power of creation. It's not intellectual at all. This is one of the things we want. We want to be able to sort of think we can control the energies, but why we have music, dance, why we have all these different rituals, is it says these energies need to be expressed differently than just up here. They need to be danced. They need to be expressed. And this is why the Tower is so important, because Mars is the energy within all of us that is about aggression and anger and rage. And that this is what is going on and feeding. If we watch the media, it's about be angrier, be even angrier. And this is one of the things about a question archetypally, because the question is, if you keep burning your house down, how do I turn the heat down? How do I go from rage to incubation? How do I change? And this is a question of a raging, I really believe an ego that has warred its way to the coast, meaning taken the land, taken everything that the neighbor had. If you want it, I take it. I mean, I'm a hungry ego. I take. Until finally you reach a point where you can take no longer. You can get no further. And this is where the tower says, I remind you that the fire inside you is not personal, it's human. So as you learn to control that anger and use it not to burn your neighbor, but to heat your food and to warm your family, you'll understand how these energies are the same energies. But if they're overheated, they will destroy you. If they're kept in balance, they will hold you. And this is then the last of the four, which is judgment, shin, life. And this is what came to me, I'll burn down your house. And this is also Pluto, which has to do with the transpersonal. It's not personal what's going on. It's transpersonal. Meaning that it's a bit like Dorothy or the Wizard of Oz. It's where we go into one world and we cannot return to see the world that we left the way we once did. And this has both beneficial and difficult elements in it. That's why so much of the anxiety, so much of the crisis mind going on, and that's why tonight, because this is really going to bring us to the next step, which is going up into ascension, is I really want to use this now as a creative instrument. One of the things I heard when I began upstairs was we don't build spaceships, we build mind ships. This is a hologram. That there's no there in a hologram. What we're doing is creating coordinate points that allow ingress, so we're not swept away, we're actually held in a stable condition. That's very important tonight, because as you go up, and we're not going to keep talking on this level, I want to really bring it in different levels, meaning we're going to appeal to the structure, the archetype, the sense of the black and white of things. Why are these energies occurring? But as we transition upstairs, as quite literally we ascend, but we don't leave home, we will transition into the library, into the living library. But we will see that to ascend into that library is only possible when we hold the structure below. And this is something that to get here, been a consciousness that's always about moving and getting somewhere. But when we get here, we realize that we are trees, that if we live in Malibu, we have no reason to get to Santa Monica. It's not what trees do. You go deeper. And this is what the soul, that sense of place, where do you live? Who are you? Not what does your neighbor have? Why are you not where you should be? You are exactly where you should be. You are the tree that must find its roots, because from there you will trust who you are, and it will no longer be living in the world of the optics of I must get somewhere, but in the knowing of energetics that I trust my roots, that where I live and what is inside of me is of value, which is something that has been beaten out of most people. And that's why we must reclaim it. I'd love to say I was just so gifted creatively, and as an artist, it just flowed out of me. All of this came out of always a great battle with these things inside of me. How do you express the inexpressible? How do you love when everything says don't love? How do you not give in to cynicism? How do you retain wonder? How do you honor human innocence when the world seems so cruel? Well, you do it where you live. You do it with the people you care about. And you say to the world, you know what, if you're not interested, God bless you, but I am. And that's when the consciousness we all seek to know becomes interested in us. Whatever we intend begins to be interested in us, either for good or for ill. And that's why the last part, as we look here, we see structurally, think of a square of Pluto, Mars, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, but the story of fire, meaning this journey that is stripping away the pretensions of I have more than you do, I have somewhere to get that will change me, to the sense that I'm on my knees and I must tell a story, at least where I live, about why I loved in spite of all the reasons not to. And so now we move into the story, really, of Phoenix Arise and the Equinox. Because we're going to understand that each of us are a Phoenix. And the mystery of the Phoenix is that you're not born into time, you're born into creation. You're whole and holy. Now think about tonight, right? Think about an acting question. Just as a group of actors would say, can we hold amongst ourselves an agreement that this is possible? that maybe we're really the outcome, not of something in time, but something across time that finally in each of us holds this greater mystery and says the key is not your neighbor, but you. That's what puts us, when we think of wheels within the wheel of the tarot below, which says now you can hold the spokes, all of the stories. And not over-identify with the characters, but realize, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, you're always navigating Kansas. It's always black and white. It's always difficult. And almost people you don't like. But it's not about that. It's about remembering that the imagination frees us to see beyond the difficulty, to not create an identity based in it. And that's why, as we move from this, Blake reminds us, William Blake, to open the eternal worlds, to open the immortal eyes of man inwards, into worlds of thought, into eternity, ever expanding in the bosom of God, the human imagination. And as you ascend upstairs into that library, feel that love of the human imagination, the wings of the ages saying, I'm wrapping around you with a story trying to remind you you're heroic, not a bunch of fools. We're all fools, but that's what makes us heroic. Anybody who knew better would have said, I'm out of here. But we stayed. It said, how hard can it be? You know how building projects go. And that's why this building project is leading to the story of ascension. And this painting of mine is saying that across the ages, like the spin of the electron, over and over again we've been asking, what does it mean to be human? So we've asked it in the 16th century, the 17th century, we've asked it as Roman, we've asked it as Egyptian, we've asked it as Christian, as Jewish, because to honor the question of who are we must honor all of it. And that's the story of inclusion. That's why it's very important about the judgment archetype. The question of judgment is there is no I and thou. There is no red and blue. There is no us and them. It is all you. It is all I. Meaning that we are each woven of the whole and whole story of the below, the archetypal structure, the above, the human imagination, the library that's been formed by our journey across the ages, which our DNA we are now woven of, and the in-between, domestic responsibility. And that helps us understand our divine body. Our structure, our black and white, keeps our feet on the ground. Our belly, our heart, our womb, our breasts, our chest says, I love these people. And that keeps us home, keeps us saying this is the most important thing. And that keeps our head on our shoulders, so we're not using our creativity to escape, but to actually stay. And that's why this becomes quite a great revelation as we go upstairs, because we return to what? A painted cave. That's our first language. It returns us back to the truth that in the beginning we always wanted meaning. We wanted context. And that our arts were never about illustration. They were about communion. It was about the creative spirit, not about art markets. And this is one of the things why I think a lot of people come here and go, yeah, I'm exhausted. The world keeps asking me how to sell these things, and I don't even know how to connect with them. And that's why tonight, really, we're moving into and out of time tonight. Because essentially when you create the conditions for the soul, for the being, to experience itself within the graciousness of its greater story, which is one of the reasons why we're very inspired by great gardens and libraries, is the body goes, oh, I feel great, I feel alive. And that's why ascension, if we see the verticality here, and as we move up, and I want you to really internalize this, a sense of using image and idea to give yourself permission, again, like an acting challenge. How can I hold this truth that I am like this house, all of these qualities? I'm structure, I'm domestic responsibility, and I'm imagination. And as we ascend then, what comes to us is the magus. And he is a seed, not a magician, not a trickster. The tarot here, the wheel here, is about intentionality. We are the gardens we cultivate, and this is essential now. I cannot tell you how essential it is. This night, this equinox, after these fires, is very profound. I heard during the fires, the apocalypse doesn't happen all at once, but in no uncertain terms, it's not the apocalypse. The apocalypse is a story in human revelation, not in religion, where suddenly the old ways of seeing do not work and create a type of insanity. And they force us back to realize that this has always been, in one way or another, this insanity of the worlds we've been navigating. But it's bringing us back to realizing we are the mooring we've been looking for. And as community tonight, look around, and when you're upstairs, look at each other and realize, just say, you know, what if we've been on this for, oh, I don't know, 18.5 million years together? What if we've been on this so long and we've been so challenged to forget everything over and over again until we could finally return, not saying, oh, I'm finally something else, but no, I'm finally human. I'm finally home, and I don't want to leave. And that's when, if you think about consciousness, we become interesting, because we're no longer trying to get somewhere. We're here. That's not simply psychological, that's alchemical. And that's why the alchemical, as above, so below, we plant a seed of intention so that it says, plant wisely and with love the garden we begin to grow this day. Joyous spring equinox. And that's really what I want to bring this around to, the sense of this is our story, this is our seed tonight. And just because we can, let's ascend up into the library and transition. Now, who's not been here before? Has everyone been here? Oh, great. Well, this will blow your mind. This is where John... I wanted to, again, what we're going to do is I want to do this more from a storytelling point of view, and for us to really just take a moment to sink into, in a few minutes, a place where I want to see where we go, just sort of in a guided meditation, not a long meditation, but I think a deep one. Because many of the qualities I feel here, now think of a creative process, or you're working on something where you have to trust that which can't be known ahead of time. It has to be discovered. That's why a lot of this room is very important, because it's very much like an archaeologist going, I don't know what's there. I have to allow it to emerge. And for us tonight on the equinox, I really feel to think of this as an alchemical alembic, as a creative womb, as an incubator, as the truth of what the library is saying. Because as we are here, each of us are being told that you are now returning to a story you can live with, a story that finally isn't about which book was right or wrong, but a story that says, no, to know who you are, you needed all of the books. And this is really where we have this relationship upstairs to the mother and the ancestors, and also to the living waters. And why with the 3D effect, they're multidimensional, I think is very telling to us, is it is actually trying to say to each of us, if you look at me one way, look at me again, I'm a relationship. And that's what I want us to think tonight about, as having a relationship with our curiosity, with our imagination, but also as community. Start thinking, because many of our models really are based in an isolated self. Not a sense musicians would say, or actors would say, we're about ensemble. We're about how do we come together and trust each other's instrument? How do we trust each other's story? And that's why the ensemble here is, as you feel the energy as we go deeper, I want you to also take a moment and to feel one another's energy, this feeling of how we, again, create, as we do in theater. And we know from when we're listening to music, when we're listening to rock and roll, the body doesn't need to be told. It starts to move. It's its own proof. And that's actually the level of consciousness now that is upon us, which is this ability for the trust of the instrument to finally trust the music. And that's why I want to, and some of you have seen this, but I don't want to do this just to reveal this tonight. I want to do this to honor this. That we often see Pythagoras like this in old images.
Hermes.
And Pythagoras as well. You're right, actually, Hermes is even more important. Hermes Trismegistus, or as he was. And this really, when we think about it, as the electron is spinning, all of the different probabilities on its course, and in that spin creating that which holds us, holds the story. And that's what the spin of the library is tonight. And almost like setting up for actors a sense of permission, a sense of the play. The play tonight is, well, let's imagine that we began in an empty cave. We began where there was nothing, like our mother's womb. We just began. And then to tell a story, we began painting the cave. We began inviting the animals in because we realized that you can't talk to them in one way or another. You can commune with them. You can draw them in, quite literally, with your hand. That's why one of the things that's quite lovely about this place is that everything here has literally been drawn forth. And that's magic. But it's not the magic to convince us of a false optical illusion. And this is why art is so important. The arts are not the optical illusion of magic. They're the manifestation of true human magic, which is the capacity to resolve the irresolvable problems into something beautiful. Or as I like to say, to take our despair and turn it into the blues. And so this is the key tonight, is we are each a sphere. We are each whole and holy. We are each holographic. Now, I might be standing here in the library, and you might be sitting there, but we're in the same library. And if we think about this as a genetic code and what the scientists are trying to tell us, we start to understand we're all informed by this pattern. We're woven of the whole and holy heritage of what it means to be human. And on the equinox, this is very important because this lets us then, do you see I'm stepping into the wheel? And on the equinox, as I said, we start the wheels turning. What happens then? The wheel turns, and suddenly you have a gyroscope. When you have a gyroscope, you can give yourself passionately, like you can give yourself passionately to a play, to a book, to a story, but not be swept into madness by it. And that's what the balance is. Equinox is equal day, equal night, love and thought, energy and form, yin, yang. It's the partnership. It's the androgyny of consciousness that says life is based on partnership. Not the illusion of separation, but the realization of generation. And part of our quality tonight is to put our story together as this did for us over the years, because we have to take into consideration the manifestation of the phoenix on the equinox. And the story that phoenix arise will show us visually. This is not conceptual art. This is sacred art, meaning that its geometries are fractal, mathematical, geometrical patterns, speaking a universal language, not the opinion of humans, but the mathematical language of cosmos. That's why this becomes so important, is that the equinox says, well, what do I mean about equal night? What does balance mean? And this is very important because the solstice, if you think of this spinning disk, is when we finally stop moving forward and stand erect. And out of the top of the head, like a gyroscope, we are able to hold the center. And therefore the world turns around us and the weather conditions we see as changing. But now, when we come to the equinox, we say, why do we have the changing seasons? And it says, let me show you. We'll have the cross, we'll have the wheel, and we'll have the spokes. And that the Phoenix Arise, this painting of mine, as we can see, this story of creation, but as a card. Now, why this is important too is that the rectangle for the ancient Egyptians, our other selves and other ages, say this is the golden section. This is going to tell you that you're not born into time, you're born into creation, because only art, only creation can tell you in the language you're composed of. Because art comes from devotion. It comes from the willingness to endure when everything in the world says, what's the point? And that's a deeper love. And that's why only this deeper love, which we're surrounded by, can tell us who we are. Because it says, include my despair too. It wasn't just about yours. But include my art as well. Because it was my compensation, just like yours. And include my home as well, because you know what? My human struggle was just as difficult as yours. But it was different. And it taught me a lot. And that's why as we put this here, and now think about going from black and white to color, we'll see this revelation that I was not expecting to see, and I still find impossible, but also I believe that on a symbolical night of the equinox, it's very important to tell this story, because I saw this, and a friend of mine's daughter, who was 11, slid the card over, and from this, we begin to see what's going to tell us the story that the painting is called Phoenix Arise. And we ask, well, what's a phoenix? And the mythologist says, well, the phoenix is the bird of immortality and rebirth that returns after 500 years and builds a nest. And once the nest is built, it erupts into flames. So this is what happened, is I put the cards down and realized that this revelation is just that. It's a fractal mathematical geometrical model of a nest and feathers.
And if those of you who haven't seen it, if you want to go up closer and look and see what it looks like.
Yeah, I believe, because again, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a sacred geometrical pattern is that which communicates not with our waking ego mind, but actually with our deeper pattern self. This is why everything here is an archetypal and pattern structure, meaning that if each of us stand here, we each perceive, although uniquely, the same structure. That's why, again, this blossom is going to tell us a great story, that from the nest erupted into flames. And I pulled out the cards, and it erupted into flames. And I always say, but it's true, I can't figure out how you would figure out how to figure this out. It's like having a child. This is Carla telling me she's pregnant. I realize that it doesn't matter what I think or what I believe. It's like, I really don't have a clue. I get humble. And I feel like that's why all of the flowers, all of these blossoms that surround us in this room are the same painting, the same sacred geometry revealing that we're not born into time, we're born into creation, and we are going from nesting or contracting to blossoming. That's why it's painful. That's why these energies downstairs, we're like, think about that which triggers a blossom, right? There's the final, I can't keep my fist closed anymore. I can't fight anymore. I'm exhausted. And suddenly we go, I can't, oh, well, that's way more interesting than this. But you can't get there without, in a way, all the steps. And so that's why, as well, to bring this from the blossom also back to the same story in stone, because you talked about stone. And I want to honor the stones because these are my favorite friends. Other than, well, they're my favorite stone friends. And they've taught me a lot. They have taught me that they say we stone people don't carry the knowledge of time. We are the nature of all time. We don't speak to you with words, we speak to you with energy. We expect you to drop into our frequency. That's one of the things tonight, really tonight, is to drop into that frequency where you listen as in a forest, when you allow yourself not to be this way, but this way. And that's why this story of these stones, which we can see this heart-shaped stone, really the size of a human heart, which came to me in 2005 when Carla and the girls and I, on Easter Sunday, were walking, and I heard, "We are the Chumash elders. We walk outside of time in what you call dream time." For us, this is a time of communicating. For you, it's still a time of dreaming. Learn to communicate. So I picked this up, and I can't show you because it's close up, but you'll see this hieroglyphics. There's a story of the elongated head that we'll see so often in our alien mythology. And why this helps us understand what this helps us understand is that it's all about a primary seed. And about a primary seed helps us say, well, what is this seed then? This seed is the phoenix, meaning it's creation. It contains all qualities and conditions, and this is thrown into the waters of time. On Mother's Day, the same year, I don't hear anything this time, but I lean over at the same place and I pick up another cluster of fossils. These, it turns out, is a brachiopod which has been extinct for 300 million years, and actually is the forerunner of this, which is still in existence, which is the bivalve clam. And this brachiopod, according to the geologist, is the size of a human heart, and the largest he ever saw was the size of a dime. So it helps us understand symbolism. This essentially becomes this story of the stones. As we can see here, this looks like a child. You see, it looks that sense of a child. I must do it like this. So I placed it like this, and it stayed upright. And then I placed this on the stone, not knowing what would happen. So I can just swipe my hand over it, but oh, it's on this board. I see. No, I got it. Now that's a message. You're going to have to say, hey, well, that's a coincidence, or it's a message. It's a message told to us in the language of the Chumash. Chumash also venerated stones. I was told that these stones came to the Chumash 10,000 years ago and were venerated. And I think that they go all the way back to Lemuria, actually. About 5 or 6 million years ago. But that's another story. Because I went back to give thanks, and the last part of this story was this orb, this sphere. And so this became this story of the mind returning to the body. This story of Yoda Buddha, meaning a quality of consciousness now that is trying to say that each of us in our heart mind, in our phoenix self, are a unique work of creation. We are a unique work of art. And that the story of art is that it is alchemical. It's not something that is given. It's a transmutation, almost an impossible transmutation, because the transmutation here is, what if each book holds the extreme difficulty of this tension? And that we could only know the purpose of all of these books when we step out and see ourselves as part of all of these books. And that's when the revelation of the Phoenix comes in. That's when the revelation of wheels within wheels. And that's when this really does become a mind ship. We begin to appreciate the fact that the Akashic record, which we talk about a lot in esotericism, which people see as this golden library, which of course it is, it goes back to a cosmological time. The ancient Egyptians, we have to begin to understand that we didn't come from not knowing. We came from vast knowing. We came from golden worlds to the linoleum world, to the ranch-style human scale world, to the I gotta tell my wife and children why it matters, because the world doesn't seem to care. And it seems like I have to. And in the golden days, we all know it matters, and we're aligned. And then we give up that alignment. And we have to ask why. And it says, why did we separate ourselves? Why did we go on this journey of unfoldment, of this to this? It says, once this happens, because you'll realize that a blossom isn't in time. And maybe it's taken a long time to get here. But the next question is not about getting somewhere else, but about trusting more deeply the story of who and what we are. So if everyone can close their eyes, why don't we just do this here? And let's
I'm just going to set the lights down.
Yeah, you can actually turn off the overheads if you would.
Yeah. And I'm just going to hit a little bit with the bowl
Yeah, good.
while everyone's relaxing.
Good, yeah. Keep the vamp out of it.
They say it clears the area of negative energy and the smoke takes your prayers to heaven.
Yeah, which
Ooh,
is
we like that.
beautiful. Yeah, smokestack. Yes. So with that in mind, let the smoke take your prayers to heaven. As your feet stand firmly on the earth, let the smoke.
My prayer become an incense that rises up.
Yeah.
You do that? Sure. They actually like 4 verses. I cut that one short. So, okay. Hey, 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 young you are. 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 Hey, hey, young you are. Hey, 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 young you are. Hey, young you are. Hey, young you are. Hey, 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 young you are. Hey, young you are. Hey, young you are. Oh, Olandar.
That was beautiful is this is sacred Chumash land. And the story they tell us is that there is no ownership and a custodianship. And I believe this tells us the story of our humanity. There is no ownership, there's only custodianship. And that we're in this together. And for this equinox, the Holy Cross really came into a sense of honor, and for us to visually really look at this sense of the cross with the four dots in the middle. Because so much of this is about the story of the hieroglyph of the human soul really being the hieroglyph of the earth. That we are brought together with this quality of in union, as we think of Yod He Vav He, the 4 directions, the 4 elements. Always 4, always the quaternary, always the sense of, with this we begin, with the 4 we create the foundation of the house. And so on this equinox, let us each think about what we might, as I say, want to give back, and to take what you've written and to put it in the center, in the chalice, and to think about this really as a ritual. Because when the ancestors walk with us, which I realize now, is that all of the patterns that, for us, let us walk these ancient paths. It's where the ancestors can actually see us and actually enter into communion with us because we're speaking their language. And that's why the equinox. Good night. I would almost say this is the...
No.
Nothing like the wise use of fire.